In lesson 5, we're talking about fractional parts. So the new concept says, we often use fractions to describe part of a group. A fraction is composed of a numerator and a denominator. The numerator, the top number, talks about the number of parts described. The denominator, the bottom number, talks about the number of total equal parts. We can find a fractional part of a group by dividing by the denominator and multiplying by the numerator. So dividing and denominator both start with D's. That's kind of a memory trick to help you out. A quart is 32 ounces. To find the number of ounces in 3/4 of a quart, 3/4 of a quart, we can divide 32 by 4. 32 divided by 4 is 8. And find the number of ounces in 1/4. So 1/4 of a quart is 8 ounces. Then we can multiply by 3. 3 times 8 is 24 to find the number of ounces in 3/4. So once you have 1/4, you can multiply by 3 to get how many is in 3/4. So 3/4 times 32 ounces then is 24 ounces, because 32 divided by 4 is 8, and 8 times 3 is 24. So the thing to remember here is we can divide by the denominator and multiply by the numerator. So divide by the bottom, the one that's down below, divide down, and multiply by the one that's on top. So example 1, there were 30 questions on the test. 1/3 of the questions were true-false, and 2/5 were multiple choice. How many questions were true-false? So we have 30 total, and the first fraction is for true-false, so 1/3 of the questions. So 1/3 times 30, remember, we can multiply by what's on the top and divide by what's on the bottom. So this could be 30 divided by 3, which is 10, and in this case the numerator is just 1, so that's going to give us 10 again. So this is dividing by the numerator, or the denominator. And this is multiplying by the numerator. So in A, the solution says to find 1/3 of 30, we can divide 30 by the denominator 3. So there are 10 true-false questions. So in the second one, we have 2/5 are multiple choice. Well, 2/5 we would write as 2/5. And again, we multiply by the numerator, divide by the denominator. So when I take 2/5 times 30 questions, what that means is 30 divided by the denominator, 5. So that's 6. And then multiplied by the numerator, 2. So that's 12. So this again is dividing by the numerator, or denominator, excuse me. And this is multiplying by the numerator. And the explanation for B says to find 2/5 of 30. And a good thing for you to know is that that word of means multiply. So it's the same thing as what I wrote here. Of in math means multiply. We can divide 30 by the denominator 5 and find there are 6 questions in each fifth. Then we multiply by 6 to find the numerator. or multiply 6 by the numerator 2 to find the number of questions in 2/5. So 1/5 would be 6, but we need 2/5, so that's 12. We will learn many strategies to compare fractions. One strategy we can use is to determine if the fraction is greater than or less than 1. To estimate the size of a fraction, we can compare the numerator to the denominator. For example, if Kyler has read 3/10 of a book, then he has read less than half because 3 is less than half. Half of 10 would be 5. So 3/10 is less than 5/10. And this, we know, would be the same thing as 1/2. Because 5 is half of 10. If Taylor has read 3/4 of a book, then she has read more than half the book because 3 is greater than half of 4. So 3/4 is greater than half of 4 is 2. So the fraction would be 2/4, which is the same thing as 1/2. So now using that information, it says arrange these fractions from least to greatest. So for each fraction we ask, is the fraction less than 1/2, equal to 1/2, or greater than 1/2? Well, if we look at 3/6, we can draw a picture like they did here. And 3/6 is half. 3 is half of 6. So 3/6 equals 1/2. From the picture here, if I was to put in the half line, we can see that 3/5 is greater than 1/2. And if you think about that, half of 5 is 2.5. 3 is greater than that. And then 3/8, again, if I put that half line down the middle here, 3/8 is less than 1/2. Because that would be 4/8, which is the same thing as 1/2. So, order from least to greatest, we would put the one that's less than 1/2, 3/8, then the one that's equal to 1/2, 3/6, and then the one that's greater than 1/2, 3/5. So the thinking skill over here is kind of important to look at. What do you notice about the denominators of the fractions when listed from least to greatest? So if we look at the denominators, when I put them from least to greatest, the 8, which is the biggest number, is actually the one that's the smallest because you've cut it into smaller pieces. So if you think about it in terms of a pizza, would you rather share a pizza with 8 people or 5 people? Which way are you going to get more? So the denominators, when you put them in order from least to greatest, if the numerators are the same, are going to decrease. 8, 6, 5. They get smaller as you go from least to greatest. The numerators in this case are all the same, 3, 3, 3. So use your observations to quickly arrange these fractions from least to greatest. Well, like I said, the numerators are the same, just like in the problem we did, and the denominators start with the biggest and go to the smallest. So the biggest denominator is 12, so 1/12, then 1/10, then 1/8, and then 1/4. So numerators are the same, and the denominators go 12, 10, 8, 4. So biggest to smallest for the denominator means the entire fraction is smaller. Again, think of it in terms of a pizza. If you're going to get one slice of pizza, would you rather, or are you going to get more if you're sharing it with 12 people, or if you're only sharing it with 4 people? So example 3 says compare 2/3 of an hour with 2/5 of an hour. So again, if the numerators are the same, which they are in this case, the bigger denominator means that it's a smaller fraction. So 2/5 is going to be smaller than 2/3. If you want to draw the circles, here's 2/3. Let's see. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2/5. So if I put the half lines in, you can see that 2/3 is bigger than a half, 2/5 is smaller than a half. So both strategies get us to the same answer, looking at the denominators and saying, oh, the 2/5 must be smaller because you're cutting it into smaller pieces and getting the same number of pieces. Or looking at the fractions and saying, well, 2/3 is more than a half, 2/5 is less than a half. All right, so the practice. How many minutes is 1/6 of an hour? Well, 1/6 of an hour is 60 minutes total. So we want 60 times 1/6, or 1/6 of 60. Remember, of and times are the same thing in math. So I would divide by the denominator. 60 divided by 6 is 10. And I could go through and multiply by the numerator. It's not going to change it in this case because it's still going to be 1. So 10 minutes is 1/6 of an hour. 3/5 of the 30 questions on the test were multiple choice. How many multiple choice questions were there? So 3/5 of 30 means 3/5 times 30. So divide by the denominator. Gives me 6. And then multiply by the numerator. Gives me 18. So there's 18 questions that are multiple choice. And then it says, explain why your answer is reasonable. Well, 3/5, if I look at that fraction, I know is going to be a little bit more than a half, because 2.5 would be half of 5. So it's going to be a little bit more than half, and half of 30 is 15. So a little bit more than 15 is 18. So it's reasonable answer. If I got, 40 questions to be multiple choice, then I'd know I did something wrong because there's not even 40 questions on the test. Greta drove 288 miles and used 8 gallons of fuel. Greta's car traveled an average of how many miles per gallon of fuel? So for this one, we want to take and make a fraction out of the 288 miles and the 8 gallons of fuel. So when you see per in math, that's where the fraction line goes. So if I say miles per gallon, that means miles on top, gallons on the bottom. So miles is 288 and 8 gallons on the bottom. So we can do some division here. How many times does 8 go into 2? It can't, it's too big. So how many times does 8 go into 28? 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Subtract those and I get 3. 38. How many times does 8, by bringing the 8 down, sorry. How many times does 8 go into 38? Goes in 4 times. 4 times 8 is 32. So 6. So we're going to say about 34 miles per gallon. And the symbol like that, a little squiggly line. And then miles per gallon is the units. And the final question. Arrange these fractions from least to greatest. So the numerators are all the same. So if I'm going to go from least to greatest, that means I'm going to put the most number of parts first. So the most number of parts is 12. So 5/12. And then the next most parts is 5/10. and the next most parts is 5/6. And if you look at these, 5/12 is going to be less than a half, because half of 12 would be 6. 5/10 is equal to a half, because half of 10 is 5. And 5/6 is more than a half, because 3 is half of 6. 5/6 is actually pretty close to 1. So, different ways to solve the same problem.